Alright folks, so we're going to do some more translations, and again this is going to be translations that are using only single atomic letters. Much like the first video, I'm going to be redoing this one just because the first version was a little bit, not that great. So let's start with number 9. Number 9, we're going to do the same thing we did earlier. We're going to start by trying to identify anything that might indicate the type of symbols we're going to be using, the main operators, etc. So Polly fails to be a parrot, provided that. So provided that means that everything that comes after it is going to be in the antecedent of a conditional. Everything after it is a sufficient condition. And then we have a cannot talk, so that's going to be a negation of not talk, and does not want a cracker. And also note that we have an and. And one of the things to think of is that we're going to want to group everything over here together. So we could just translate she cannot talk and does not want a cracker. But let's just go ahead and underline some things. So Polly fails to be a parrot. I also missed the fail, so that's going to be also a negation. And Polly's a parrot is P. Polly can talk is T. And Polly does want a cracker is C. So with some of these sentences, we're going to find that the object, in this case Polly, isn't repeated throughout the not the object, the subject of the sentence isn't repeated throughout the sentence, so we just have to understand syntactically what she is referring to. So let's go ahead and write this one down. So if Polly cannot talk and Polly does not want a cracker, then it follows that Polly is not a parrot. An alternative way of writing this one would be to say that if Polly does indeed want a cracker, or if Polly is indeed a parrot, then either Polly is going to talk or want a cracker, and possibly both. We don't necessarily know which one, but at least one of those things would be the case. Let's go on to 10. Neither nor. So with neither nor, there's two ways to translate these things. You can translate them as two independent sentences, or you can translate them as a negation wedge. So I'm going to show you both. So birds are mammals is translated with B. Snakes are mammals is translated with S. So we could say that it's not the case that birds are mammals, and it's not the case that snakes are mammals. That's true. Or, and this should look familiar because De Morgan's, it's not the case that either birds or snakes are mammals. Both of these translations work. You can kind of pick whichever one makes the most sense for you. Going on to 11. Given that. Given that means that we're going to be working with something that's in the antecedent. We're talking about a sufficient condition. So given that Linda is both smart and diligent, then, there's an implied then here, she will do well. Buts are translated as ands, and it means that everything that came before is grouped together. Linda is not diligent. So Linda is both smart and diligent. Linda will do well. Linda is not diligent. So given that Linda is both smart and Linda is diligent, it follows that Linda will do well. And it's not the case that Linda is actually diligent. For 12, Al wins only if, so we just go ahead and draw an arrow, if Ed does not win. That's going to be one sentence alone, and there's a connector. Ed wins only if Al does not win. So Al wins, A. Ed does win would be E. Ed wins, E. Al does not win, A. So let's do the first set of parentheses first. Al wins only if it's not the case that Ed wins. And Ed wins only if it is not the case that Al wins. This is also actually telling us that they both can't win at the same time. Going on to 14. We see an if, then. So since the if comes first, we know we can just go ahead and write an arrow above the then. But let's take a look at this fails language. We see that S is translated as Smith wins. So if we see that Smith fails to win, that's going to be negation. And then either or Means we're going to have a wedge there. Then we don't see any other negations. So Smith wins would be an S. Then Jones wins is a J. And then Smith or Jones are tied is a T. So if it's not the case that Smith wins, then either Jones won or they tied. Then going on to 14, we have an assuming that. This also can be translated as if. So if Julio is a bachelor, implied then, he is a man who is unmarried. And this un here is going to be a negation. Why? Because J is actually Julio is married. Then Julio is a bachelor, is B. Julio is a man, M. Julio is married would be J. Then we just go and start plugging stuff in. Assuming that Julio is a bachelor, B, it follows that Julio is both a man and Julio is not married. And then for 15, we have Aaron's being penniless is a sufficient condition. That means that everything that came before it is going to be in the antecedent. So you can just go ahead and write an arrow since the antecedent stuff is coming first. For her being miserable. For her, Aaron being miserable. So Aaron being penniless is P. And then for Aaron being miserable is M. So this one is Aaron's being penniless is a sufficient condition. It is enough to make it the case that Aaron is miserable. So necessary and sufficient condition stuff is pretty confusing some of the time, and it kind of depends where in the sentence we see the statement. So let's take a look at this. So if the sentence had instead said, a sufficient condition for Aaron being miserable is Aaron's being penniless, we would have known that we need to move the P part all the way back into the antecedent, even though it comes second in the sentence. In contrast, let's take a look at 16. Dirk's being tall is a necessary condition for his being on the team. So in this case, since we're talking about the necessary condition first, we must know that all of this stuff must be in the consequent. Why? Because necessary conditions are in the consequent. They're the thing that if that weren't the case, the other thing couldn't be true. Think modus tollendo tollens here. Here's an example. There's our favorite penguin. I cannot write today. Being a bird is a necessary condition for being a penguin. Why? Well, because if something weren't a bird, it wouldn't be able to be a penguin. So let's go back to this one. We have Dirk being tall. That's a T. Then Dirk being on the team. That's an O. So since being on the team is a necessary condition, we know that O is a necessary condition for T being true. If Dirk were not on the team, oh, I already screwed it up actually. JK. Dirk's being on the team is a necessary the T part here, so the fact that T is for tall, but we also have on the team is confusing me. Dirk's being tall, T, is a necessary condition for his being on the team. If he were not T, then he would not be on the team. That's another way of writing this. Sorry, this last one was confusing just because linguistically of how it's framed. Let's get a few more of these in. So here we have the statement, Santa does not exist as false. So since we have quotations here, let's put it all in parentheses. We have false, and then Santa does not exist, that's a negation. Santa does exist is S. So let's do this inside the parentheses first. Santa does not exist. That's a not S. And then that statement, not S, is false. So we add one more negation. Remember, we can't write this. That parentheses right there does not belong. Just a note. Let's go back to 18. We will be evicted unless we pay the rent. Unless we translate as a wedge. We will be evicted, that's an E. We pay the rent, that's a P. So either we will be evicted or we pay the rent. 19 is a little bit weird. So although implies we're going to have an and somewhere, but also is an and. We have a not here, not there, not there, and we have an if statement there. But notice that the if statement is coming after the consequent. So we're going to have to flip some things around. But let's start with the first part. Although reindeer exist, R, Santa does not exist, not S. So this also could be translated that reindeer exist and Santa does not exist. Then on the right side, adults are not honest. Adults are honest. Then we have the negation there. If Santa does not exist. Putting this all together, although reindeer exist, and it's not the case that Santa exists, and then when we go into the second part, we add an and. Adults are not honest if Santa does not exist. So if Santa does not exist, then it follows that adults are not honest. It's a bit convoluted. Sorry, it's the logic of it. Then we have 20. Just in case. So just in case is weird. Just in case actually means a double arrow. And then we don't have any negations, so Paula will pass the test. P, if Paula studies diligently. So Paula passed the test, just in case she studies diligently. So just in case also means the exact same thing as if and only if. We could also translate this as if Paula passes, then she studied diligently. And if she studies diligently, then she'll pass. Both of these things would work. So in this video, I went through the rest of those first 20 in this part of the handout. And then in the next video, I go through, I believe, the next 20 or so.